Most people think discipline is about motivation or willpower, but psychology tells a different story. Real discipline isn't something you feel, it's something you design through habits, identity, and mental conditioning. Once you understand how the brain resists effort and seeks comfort, you can start building systems that make discipline almost automatic. In this video, we'll break down how to build unshakable discipline using psychology, so your actions stop depending on mood and start depending on structure. Today we will talk about how to build unshakable discipline using psychology. So, before we start, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. 1. Discipline is not willpower. It is a system. Most people misunderstand discipline as a constant battle of willpower. But psychology shows that willpower is a limited and unstable resource. It fluctuates based on sleep, stress, emotions, and environment. This is why people feel highly disciplined one day and completely unmotivated the next. Unshakable discipline is not built on emotional strength, it is built on systems that reduce the need for constant decision-making. The brain naturally conserves energy and avoids effort whenever possible, a principle known as cognitive economy. When actions are not automated, the brain must repeatedly decide whether to act, and this creates fatigue. True discipline begins when behavior becomes structured so consistently that motivation is no longer required. In this sense, discipline is not about forcing action, it is about removing friction between intention and behavior until action becomes the default response. 2. The brain's natural resistance to effort. From a psychological perspective, the brain is designed to prioritize comfort and energy conservation. This is rooted in evolutionary survival, where saving energy increased chances of survival. As a result, the brain resists tasks that require effort, delay, or discomfort. This resistance is not laziness, it is a biological efficiency system. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning and decision-making, must override this resistance to take disciplined action. However, this override consumes mental energy, which is why discipline feels exhausting when it is not automated. Understanding this resistance is essential because it removes self-judgment and replaces it with awareness. Instead of asking, "Why am I not disciplined?" psychology reframes the question as, "What system is making discipline easier or harder for my brain?" This shift moves discipline from emotional struggle to structural design. 3. Identity-based discipline. Becoming the person first. One of the most powerful psychological principles in behavior change is identity-based discipline. Instead of focusing on what you want to do, you focus on who you are becoming. The brain strongly aligns behavior with identity because humans naturally act in ways that are consistent with their self-image. If someone sees themselves as a disciplined person, their actions gradually begin to reflect that identity. This is because the brain reduces cognitive dissonance by aligning behavior with belief. For example, instead of saying "I need to work out," an identity-based approach would be "I am someone who trains daily." This subtle shift changes internal decision-making patterns. Over time, repeated identity-consistent actions reinforce the belief, creating a feedback loop where identity shapes behavior and behavior strengthens identity. 4. Habit loops and automatic behavior formation. Habits are the foundation of discipline because they reduce the need for conscious decision-making. According to behavioral psychology, habits form through a loop consisting of cue, routine, and reward. The cue triggers the behavior, the routine is the action itself, and the reward reinforces the behavior in the brain. When this loop is repeated consistently, neural pathways become stronger, making the behavior increasingly automatic. This is known as neuroplasticity. Unshakable discipline is essentially a network of strong habit loops that operate without emotional input. For example, if studying is tied to a specific time and environment, the brain begins to associate that cue with action. Over time, the effort required decreases because the behavior becomes embedded in the brain's automatic processing system. Discipline becomes less about choice and more about pattern recognition. 5. The role of environment in behavioral control. Psychology shows that environment is one of the strongest predictors of behavior. The brain responds to external cues more than internal intentions. This means that discipline is heavily influenced by surroundings. A cluttered, distracting, or overstimulating environment increases friction and reduces focus, while a structured environment supports consistency. People often underestimate how much their surroundings shape their decisions. For example, placing distractions like phones or entertainment within reach increases the likelihood of procrastination. Conversely, designing an environment where the desired action is the easiest option significantly increases discipline. This concept is known as behavioral architecture. Instead of relying on self-control in every moment, disciplined individuals design environments that naturally guide their behavior in the desired direction. 6. Emotional regulation and delayed gratification. Discipline requires the ability to tolerate discomfort and delay gratification. Psychologically, the brain is wired for immediate rewards because they historically ensured survival. However, modern goals often require long-term thinking, which conflicts with this natural tendency. Emotional regulation becomes essential in bridging this gap. When a person feels discomfort such as boredom, frustration, or resistance, the brain signals a desire to stop the task. Discipline involves recognizing this emotional signal without immediately obeying it. Instead of reacting, individuals learn to sit with discomfort until it passes. This strengthens the prefrontal cortex and weakens impulsive responses over time. Delayed gratification is essentially training the brain to prioritize long-term rewards over short-term emotional relief, which is a core component of psychological discipline. 7. Dopamine management and motivation stability. Dopamine plays a critical role in discipline because it regulates motivation and reward anticipation. When dopamine is constantly stimulated through instant gratification activities like scrolling, gaming, or excessive entertainment, the brain becomes less responsive to low-stimulation tasks such as studying or working. This creates a motivation imbalance where important tasks feel harder than they actually are. Building discipline requires regulating dopamine input so that the brain regains sensitivity to effort-based rewards. This does not mean eliminating pleasure, but rather balancing stimulation so that meaningful tasks can still generate motivation. When dopamine is stabilized, the brain begins to find satisfaction in progress rather than constant stimulation. This shift is essential for sustaining long-term disciplined behavior without burnout. 8. Consistency over intensity. The psychology of long-term discipline, the final principle of unshakable discipline, is consistency over intensity. Psychology shows that repeated small actions are far more effective for behavior change than occasional intense effort. Intense motivation often leads to burnout because it relies on emotional energy, which is unstable. Consistency, however, builds neural pathways gradually and sustainably. Each repetition strengthens the habit loop and reinforces identity alignment. Over time, disciplined behavior becomes self-sustaining because it no longer depends on emotional highs. Instead, it operates as a stable system embedded in daily life. The key psychological insight is that discipline is not about doing everything perfectly. It is about showing up repeatedly, even in small ways, until the behavior becomes automatic. When consistency is prioritized over intensity, discipline transforms from a struggle into a stable psychological structure that supports long-term success and mental resilience. If you liked this video and would like to see more like it, please give it the thumbs up. Leave a comment and click the button to subscribe.